So, what is a cult? The answer to that might surprise you a little bit. My name is Richard Turner. I am a cult recovery therapist and cult psychology consultant. In this video, I'm going to describe in the best way I can what a cult is. Other people might have different definitions than me, but this is the definition and the understanding I have in order to be able to do my job. There are a lot of misconceptions about what a cult is. When I've delivered training on this, a lot of people say very similar things. One of the things that they say, this common misconception, is that cults are religious, and they're not always religious. Cults can be political, science fiction groups, they can be self-help or therapy groups, and I've even come across some sports clubs turning into cult-like environments. In fact, more recently, I've come across a number of cults that don't actually even operate face-to-face. They're predominantly online. So sometimes the cult members I've worked with have never actually encountered the leader or other members of the group in real life very often. Most of the interactions are done through video calls, through YouTube videos and things like that. People often think that cults are these quirky religious groups that live in communities cut off from the rest of the world. In fact, that's not entirely untrue. There are some cults that are like that, and the ones that have become quite famous, for the most part, are like that as well. But actually, cults exist in many different forms. People often say to me that they thought cults were rare. I think the reason for this is because a lot of the cults that we hear about are on the news, and they get on the news because they're extreme, and the extreme ones are rarer. So cults in general are more common. It's just we don't hear about them as much because they don't go to that extreme level of abuse and harm that, for example, the People's Temple do and Heaven's Gate went to. So when I'm talking to people, they're often quite surprised that cults exist in England, they're right on your doorstep, and they're operating right near where you live. Many people have got into this mindset that it's not a threat and it's not very common, but from my experience, that isn't true. They are everywhere. Extreme cults are less common, but it doesn't mean that cults in themselves are uncommon. Also, just because a cult isn't coercing people to take their own lives or to perform terrorist acts, it doesn't mean that they're not causing significant amount of damage to their members and their members' families. So not all cults are religious. They could be political groups, they could be self-help therapy type groups, they can be like yoga groups, they can be multi-level marketing companies. I've seen cults that operate entirely online, through mentorship programs in business. I've even seen, strangely, cults form around sport and sports clubs where people will go away and live on a sports camp and become isolated from the community, and the leader of the sports camp is narcissistic and controlling. So cult environments can form anywhere, and what might surprise you is that they can form in a workplace. Now, on LinkedIn, I see many posts about burnout, and discussions about, burnout being a thing that you somehow have caused yourself. Now, I'm always a little bit concerned about that because when I read it, it sounds like the experience of someone who's in a cult. If your employer is getting you to work over your hours and using coercive control and manipulation, and you're starting to get isolated from your family, very quickly your workplace could become cult-like. And in fact, when people leave employment and they're burnt out and run down and the self-esteem is really low and they've lost all the confidence, my first thought and my first wondering is, what is that work environment like? Is it cult-like? So that might surprise you that a cult environment doesn't necessarily have to be this religious group. That system, that psychological system, can manifest itself in many locations. So there isn't actually a set definition for what a cult is. So for me, I'm going to explain how I kind of see it. And of course, I'm always open to criticism and for people to disagree with me. In certain settings, people don't like you using the term cult to describe a group, especially if it's a religious group. And in professional circles, sometimes you can get in trouble for using that word. In a therapeutic sense, I like to use it because almost all of my clients use that word. And when they discuss why they use that word, they find that empowering. They can label the group for what it is, and it helps them in their recovery. And it's the word I use for my own personal experience as well. So that is why I use that word. For me, a cult is a psychological system of coercive control. When I'm delivering training, one of the ways I explain it is, most people have a little bit of an understanding of domestic abuse, and they understand a little bit about controlling behaviour in domestic abuse. Not everybody has an in-depth understanding, but they get a fair grasp of it. So sometimes what I say to people is, a cult is domestic abuse in a group, effectively. The psychology is close to the same. Rather than one person controlling another, it starts to get bigger. The coercive control gets bigger. So in domestic abuse, one partner might try and isolate the other partner from the family. I start controlling where they go, what they do. But in a cult, it's not just one person doing it to another. It's on a bigger scale, effectively. Now, effectively, domestic abuse is a two-person cult. There is a leader and a follower. So the lines are quite blurred. And just to blur the definition even more, sometimes when people are describing cult experiences, they're actually slipping into descriptions of modern slavery or human trafficking. So it isn't like there is this thing that a cult's here and domestic abuse is here and modern slavery is here. This is all starts to get muddied together, and the psychology all starts overlapping. So it's not like a black and white thing. And not only that, this is the coercive control in a cult is on a spectrum. And, there's not a line where something goes from being not a cult to a cult. So it's not this black and white, this is a cult, this is not a cult, and we have this behaviour over here and this behaviour over here. It all overlaps. And actually, what I noticed in lockdown, it starts to overlap with conspiracy theories and things like that. Cults can't exist without a leader, and they can't be created without a leader. So behind the scenes, in any kind of cult-like setting, there will be some kind of narcissistic leader who lacks empathy, who is manipulative and controlling. And they are the engine of the cult. So the cult is driven by the leader. The coercive control comes from the leader. Without the leader, the cult cannot exist. As I've mentioned previously, the leader could communicate face-to-face. They could communicate online through video calls, through YouTube videos, and they can communicate through books and literature. The teachings flow down from the top, and all of the resources and worship and praise and commitment flows up towards the leader. What I found is the larger the cult, the less likely it is that the members near the bottom have had even any contact with the leader. There tends to be like a hierarchy within the cults, and the teachings and the behaviours of the leader have been assimilated into the ranks below, and the people near the bottom are being controlled by the leader indirectly. In fact, the cult actually starts to become a mirror of the leader, where the leader is reinforcing behaviours they want and like, and punishing behaviours they don't want and like. So they condition the followers to effectively to start becoming like them. Some of the key factors in a group being a cult is control and manipulation and exploitation. Those are the key kind of characteristics of something being a cult, where people are losing themselves, losing their identity and losing their freedom. Just because something is a group and people are really devoted and happy in it, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a cult, because they also might be still free to do the things that they enjoy and spend time with the families and with the outside world. It becomes a cult when it's isolating, controlling and exploitative, and people lose their identity. So alongside losing their identity, members will lose things like their free time, connection with the outside world, often loss of confidence, loss of self-esteem, begin to lose their individuality, hobbies and interests, and anything that makes them unique. The cult identity becomes the dominant aspect of someone's identity. It begins to overpower everything else. The things that make people unique and different. Often when people ring me up and they are asking for advice or guidance and want to discuss their relative who is caught up in a cult, I'll say to them, has their personality changed? And usually the answer is yes. They will say, oh, the person has gone glassy-eyed. They don't really seem like they're themselves. They're distant. They all of the things they used to enjoy, they don't do anymore. The personality's changed because they are effectively adopting the cult identity, which I'll probably go into in more detail in another video. So a cult is a community that's driven by control, manipulation, and coercion. The followers are in an abusive, exploitative relationship with the leader. In the early days of someone joining a cult, what the group looks like is very different than what it turns out to be. They join a group that they think is going to help them, and it turns out to be something quite different. People don't join cults, they join groups that they think are going to help their life become better and help them find out who they are and give them purpose. What the group looks like from the outside isn't what it is when they've committed and they're deeper into it. It will look totally different. As I've mentioned, I found this to not really be a black and white issue. A group can be unhealthy but not necessarily be a cult. And as I mentioned earlier, this is on a spectrum. However, a common question that people ask me when they ring me up is such and such a group a cult? I've been experiencing this, and this. Is this a cult? And I can't really diagnose it if a group is a cult or not, just like that or on the phone. But I've often found that if you were asking that question, more often than not, it probably is a cult. If you're finding yourself going, am I in a cult? Then you probably are. From experience, you probably are. So guys, I hope that was helpful in some way. This is the first video on this channel. I'm used to producing gaming videos on my other YouTube channel, so I've had to just slow down a minute, relax, not be so full on the videos, and try and articulate myself in a helpful and useful way. I'm going to do little videos every now and again on cult psychology and share some of the things I've been learning over time. And I'll just see how this channel evolves, really. But if you've got any questions, please leave them in the comments. And thanks. Yeah, well, that's it, I suppose. Thank you so much for watching. And I'll think about some more ideas for videos. Bye-bye.